Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Welcome to chapter 202. If you've been following the course, you know that the dollar was originally a unit of money defined by a certain amount of gold or silver. The first official US paper dollar wasn't released until March 10th, 1862. Prior to that, the dollar was strictly a unit of gold and silver. There were banknotes prior, but they were only receipts for the exchange for gold and silver or paper notes or vice versa. State banks in the period between 1792 and 1836 were widely considered corrupt and deeply entangled in the politics, with state legislators often granting charters as political favors. The Panic of 1837 led to the collapse of many of the state charter banks and the demise of the Second Bank of the United States. To fill the void in banking and trade, banks began to issue their own notes, redeemable in gold and silver, at least that's what it says. This was called the free banking era, and there were around 3,000 different banks, and some studies indicate that nearly one-third of all of the free banks created in this time closed by 1863. On March 10th, 1862, the U.S. created a monster, fiat. Due to the Civil War, gold and silver coins disappeared from circulation in the East due to hoarding. Banks and later the Congress suspended specie payment, meaning no one could redeem paper notes for gold and silver. Silver remained in circulation in the West, though. That's where there's a lot of S-mint silver coins from the 1860s to 1870s that's easy to find in great condition for relatively cheap. And that's why it's important to learn history, because it allows you to pick up on patterns that you can remember, making it easy to remember key dates and the minting conditions of the times. In the East during the war, the Union needed money to fund the war, and the fiat greenback was printed for that reason. They were able to kill the monster with specie redemption in 1875, which allowed fiat greenbacks to be redeemed for gold. Gold only, but redeemed for gold in 1879. I actually have that same exact coin right here in my collection, and this coin was possibly used to exchange a $5 greenback for this $5 gold piece. So you can see 1879S, and you see there was 426,000 of these minted in the San Francisco Mint, only 300,000 in the Philly Mint. So there was about 42% more of these produced in San Francisco than there was in the Philly Mint. I will be covering the details of various coinage acts in the next few chapters, but in this chapter, I'm going to discuss the struggle between the gold and silver dollar and the fight between the elites and the regular people. Gold benefited the creditors, the bankers, the industrialists, big business, international businessmen, and the elite. Silver benefited debtors, farmers, small to medium business owners, and the American worker, especially in the western parts of the United States. But how exactly did silver help the regular people, and why did the elite prefer gold? We're going to get into that. We all know the Morgan silver dollar. Well, the silver dollar was canceled 5 years prior to the first Morgan dollar ever being minted. Silver was demonetized. No one could bring silver to the treasury for cash, not even the miners. Also, silver coins could not be used for purchases over $5. You needed gold. The rich got richer and the poorer got poorer. And to me, this is a very important part of the history of American money. So in this video, we'll be looking at the period between 1792 and 1900 so that we can fully understand the inner workings of the bimetallic standard before we move on to the coinage acts in the next chapters. This is also a precursor to chapter 301, which covers how the Morgan dollar became the undisputed champion of silver dollars. That chapter will be full of fun facts and cultural references from the first minting in 1878 to the present day, but let's get started on this chapter first. The Morgan dollar wasn't the first silver dollar, but it's the most widely known silver dollar. The U.S. had silver dollars in the past, but very few were minted, mainly due to the lack of silver in the country prior to 1859, and also the purchasing power of a dollar back then was actually pretty high. Think about what you carry in your wallet today. Do you carry $100 bills or $50 bills? You wouldn't take one to McDonald's or a garage sale. Today, there's even some stores that don't take bills over $20. Unless you're making a large purchase, $50 bills and $100 bills are really a nuisance. And that was the same for the dollar back then. The dollar had the purchasing power of $40 to $50 today in most of the 1800s, maybe more. For most people, $1 was a huge chunk of money, and most people thought in fractions of a dollar when they spoke about purchasing something, so more like a dime, a quarter, half dollar. A dollar was really a lot of money back then. Also in the 1800s, most of the time, A purchase over $5 was paid in gold or paper like banknotes. Banknotes were backed by gold and silver unless you got a wildcat note or an insolvent bank. It was easier to carry around. You could carry multiple around with you without weighing your wallet down. Also, if you wanted silver, you could change your banknotes in for silver, and as long as the bank was legit. Silver was seen as small change, used to make small transactions. It was easier and it made more sense to carry quarter and half dollars rather than a whole $1 coin. Between the 1860s and the 1910s, the US was going through many life changing technological advancements like the telephone, the telegraph, the typewriter, steam power generation, electricity, automobiles, the dynamite, cash registers, barbed wire, steel, the ticker tape, and also trains. All of this led to more organization, industrialization, and communication between the people, especially bankers and traders. The period between the 1870s and 1910s was called the Second Industrial Revolution, and while many of these amazing devices transformed the life for the middle and upper class, it often negatively affected workers through harsh and dangerous and low paying factory jobs, and it spurred a growth of labor movements and urbanization. Workers faced long hours and monotonous and repetitive tasks due to job specialization and also unsafe conditions that often led to injury or death. In response, workers organized unions to demand better wages, shorter hours, and safer environments, while the growth of factories led to massive migration from the rural areas into the cities. Farmers were losing money due to the changes caused by the Coinage Act of 1873, and the children of the farmers in rural working age moved into the cities for work, making it harder for farmers to survive, and most of them survived on bank loans. In 1866, the transatlantic telegraph cables were completed. These were undersea cables running under the Atlantic Ocean for telegraph communications. Line speed was very fast, and the slogan 2 weeks to 2 minutes was used to emphasize the improvement over the shipborne messaging. The cables altered the personal, commercial, and political relations between the people across the Atlantic. And it was used for banking almost immediately after being completed in 1866 with the ability to send financial messages instantly between continents. This revolutionized merchant banking by making a direct, real-time contact between the buyer and the seller possible and significantly reducing the risk of foreign exchange transactions, increasing its desire. Grain, coffee, cotton, and gold began to be traded in near real time. Yes, gold. Internationally, gold was seen as a more stable monetary metal. European countries started to abandon their silver standards and their bimetallic standards for the gold standard. And international bankers and businesses had pushed for a gold standard in the US all the way back in the 1850s, right after the gold rush, but they couldn't get it passed. It was thought that after the gold rush, there was enough gold to now back the dollar solely by gold and drop silver. So you can see here the countries that were leaving the silver standard at the time. You can see Canada in 1853 to 67, Netherlands in 1875, and there was a lot of pressure from Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Belgium, and other states that the United States commonly traded with. Also in 1859, there was a major discovery of silver in Virginia City, Nevada called the Comstock Lode, and it sparked a mining boom, transforming Virginia City into a thriving hub and making Nevada the site of the most valuable silver deposit in U.S. history. The wealth generated from the Comstock Lode significantly boosted the U.S. economy and helped finance the Union during the Civil War, which helped the Union win and is the reason why Nevada joined the Union and became a state in 1864. But the oversupply of silver from the Comstock Lode led to those businessmen, bankers, international brokers, and investors to push for demonetizing silver and support of a gold standard. They felt that the process of the Treasury buying silver for coining and increasing the money supply, which caused inflation, was devaluing the dollar by allowing too much money printing. They would have an aneurysm if they lived to see any of the years 1933, 1964, or 1971. They felt that gold was more stable for conducting international business, and the excess money from monetized silver was making their money lose its value. Silver was diluting the purchasing power of the dollar. Silver helped the farmers and working class people thrive for decades by both being a medium of barter and trade and increasing the money supply. But the elite saw the dollar losing its strength. So, one way to compare the demonetization of silver to more common day events would be to understand what gold and silver are today, purely commodities, right? Well, if a refiner sees too much silver coming in to be recycled, they will halt the collection of certain silver purities. We recently saw that. And in 1971, the US saw too many countries rushing to redeem gold, so they halted redemption. Both of those events were controversial and had effects that angered and worried people, but the demonetization of silver was semi reversed 5 years later to help mainly the miners, but it also helped by allowing the money supply to be increased and making life easier, especially for people in the western part of the country where banks weren't well established or trusted. And that's where the connection between the Wild West and the Morgan dollars come together. I'll be covering that in deeper detail in chapter 301. So the demonetization of silver was similar nationally to the Nixon shock internationally. The people with the power to make policy changes saw too much silver converting into the dollar, making the purchasing power of the dollar weaker internationally, so they stopped it. The silver dollar was still legal tender for amounts under $5, along with the smaller denomination coins like dimes, quarters, half dollars, even half dimes, and 3-cent silver coins. So the $1 coin, the half dime, and the 3-cent silver coins were all discontinued in 1873. But also, a new odd currency silver coin hit circulation mainly in the West, called the 20-cent piece. Half dimes were becoming harder to find in circulation, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to get the correct change for a quarter. In 1874, hundreds of common items were priced at 10 cents, so those paying with a quarter would often be shortchanged by receiving a Spanish bit, which is worth about 12.5 cents, or just a dime back. From colonial times all the way into 1857, Spanish coins like the 1 real bit and the 2 real 2 bit, and also the 4 and 8 real, were interchangeable with U.S. coins. In the West, due to coin shortages, they remained in circulation for far longer. So the 20-cent piece was introduced in 1875 as the first kind of compromise to the miners, as the lawmakers in the West noticed the demonetization of silver had become a major issue. So silver was no longer accepted at the mints in exchange for coin, and silver was no longer accepted as a collateral and not legal tender over $5. The silver price collapsed, making it unwanted and worth far less than it was before, and farmers faced a cycle where increasing debt led them to produce more, which would flood the market of crops, further lowering the price because of competition. While the gold standard limited the amount of money in circulation, it kept prices low. Farmers' fortunes declined in the 1870s due to the falling crop prices caused by overproduction, high tariffs, and increased prices of machinery and other goods, and high railroad rates for shipping. The U.S. passed protective tariffs that were primarily for industrial products, but it affected farm equipment, machinery, tools, household goods, and were meant to protect American manufacturers from foreign competition. This lack of foreign competition allowed the domestic manufacturers to charge higher prices, meaning the farmers had to pay inflated prices for the essential equipment and supplies. While American manufacturers benefited from the protectionist policies, farmers did not receive the same kind of protections for their own goods, as agricultural prices were driven down by domestic overproduction and foreign competition. This meant that the farmers were paying more for goods but earning far less for their produce, increasing their debt burden, contributing to widespread economic distress in the agricultural sector. Let's say a farmer wanted to buy seeds and equipment to start a field. Before 1873, the bimetallic system allowed silver to be converted into money, which increased the money supply, leading to inflation, meaning that the debt was easier to pay off later because they could ask for higher prices of goods sold later that year. After 1873, the dollar began their rise, meaning that interest rates rose and so did deflation, meaning that they had to discount their goods. So after a harvest was picked, the price of those items might have dropped by 50%. Now the farmer had to work twice as hard to make the same amount of money just to pay off a higher interest loan. And if they traded silver as a barter, they could no longer do that in case of emergency, like to pay for farm equipment or failure or natural disaster. A lot of farmers lost everything. To make it worse, the gold standard made the dollar harder to create, meaning that the government had less money to fund or provide help to the farmers. Usually I would agree with cutting government spending, but to me, this government spending was backed by silver. They couldn't print any more money without obtaining more silver. The US was a growing nation. How else can a country grow without printing money? That's the only thing good about printing money: growth. Back it with silver and call it Keynesian light. I guess they could never have dreamed of what we have now: endless money printing backed by absolutely nothing. That's why if I was around back then, I would have joined and supported the free silver movement. Instead of Keynesian light, today we have Keynesian ultra mega extra strength deluxe platinum plus. Sorry, I digress. But the businessmen, the bankers, the international brokers, and investors had been trying for 20 years to demonetize silver and failed each time. But in 1873, they finally got their way, and it was time for the rich to get even more richer and the poor to get even more poor. And this was going to be a long depression. That was actually the name of the period between 1873 and 1879, the Long Depression. The Long Depression ended when the economy recovered with the expansion of railroads and a new wave of investment, particularly in the American West. But like all recoveries, it wasn't equally spread. The immigrants and citizens who left the misery of the industrial East and the farm life of the Midwest for the frontier life and expansion in the West wanted a silver dollar. They didn't want paper since they traveled much of the time, and banknotes weren't trusted and might not even be accepted in other states or territories. So the bimetallic standard ended in 1873 when the U.S. passed the Crime of 73 or the Coinage Act of 1873, which moved the country to a de facto gold standard, demonetizing silver as a legal tender over $5. Businessmen and bankers who worked with foreign trade and saw the gold standard as a path to attract more foreign investment and to create more stable economic conditions were pushing for a gold standard even before the Comstock Lode fine. The Coinage Act of 1873 did not remove the silver as money, it stopped the conversion of raw silver bullion into money, and also made debts over $5 payable in gold only. The demonetization of silver led to public arguments between the free silver movement and the gold standard movement. The free silver movement wanted a bimetallic system. These are mainly farmers, debtors, and silver mine owners in the West who supported a money supply backed by both gold and silver to keep an easy and steady money supply. The gold standard movement supported a money supply backed solely by gold, and these were primarily bankers, industrialists, railroad magnates, and other businessmen often east of the Mississippi. The gold standard supporters saw silver as an inferior metal and thought it was devaluing the dollar by allowing excess money to be injected into the money supply, meaning that the dollar is being drained of its value with each silver bullion that was created into money. Demonetization angered farmers and miners who relied on silver for stability and bartering for an increasing money supply, which kept inflation growing steadily so they could actually make a profit on their crops, and also to keep interest rates lower so paying back loans were easier. So this time period led to the free silver movement and increased political divide between farmers and bankers. There are well-known theories that The Wizard of Oz was written with allegories comparing the struggle that came from the Coinage Act of 1873 and the free silver movement's attempt to convince Congress that a bimetallic standard was the way, which was written in the Constitution from the very beginning. If you haven't already, check the previous chapter, chapter 201, for more on that. I created an entire video on the allegories of the Wizard of Oz. So to recap, the Coinage Act of 1873 ultimately demonetized silver, formally pushing the U.S. toward a gold standard, which became official in 1900 with the passage of the Gold Standard Act. The controversy over the Crime of 73 and the free silver movement that followed it highlights silver's significance among agrarians and people in the western U.S., or at least the easy money and inflation that silver monetization caused in a later part of the 19th century, and the anger the demonetization caused. Well, Congress came to a compromise, thus the Morgan dollar was created. That will be all for this chapter. I suggest you skipping to chapter 301 if you want to learn more about the Morgan dollar, or chapter 201 if you want to learn about the allegories of the Wizard of Oz. In the next few chapters in Section 2, I'll be covering the many coinage acts, executive orders, and other laws dealing with money and coins. Thank you for watching and following me through this course. Please like, subscribe, and comment.